The roast was dry, the wine too warm, but it was the silence that stung most. Marie reached to pass the salt when Leanne, her son's wife, gently touched her wrist and whispered through a smile, "Let's keep the chatter minimal tonight, Guests want fresh energy." Laughter rippled around the table. Marie blinked. This was her house, her table. She set the salt shaker down, folded her napkin, and under the table quietly pressed "Submit" on the final offer to sell the home. I was told to stay quiet, so I let the walls speak for me. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. If you had met me 5 years ago, you'd have described me as a warm presence. Not loud, not flashy, but steady, like a well-tended flame. My name is Marie Halbrook, and for most of my adult life, I found peace in routines and joy in tradition. I wasn't the kind to make waves. I believed the loudest form of love was care. I taught second grade for 34 years. Raised 2 boys. Baked on Sundays. Sewed my own curtains. And when my husband John was still alive, I was part of something sacred, a quiet, joyful kind of partnership. We built our house from the ground up on a wooded corner lot in upstate New York, a place with a wraparound porch and shutters he insisted on painting hunter green. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. Every nail, every plant in the garden, every wooden beam whispered our names. John passed 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Quick, cruel. One day he was fixing the gutters. The next, we were discussing hospice. He died in our bed, holding my hand, whispering something I couldn't make out. I've spent many nights since wondering what those words were. Maybe he was saying goodbye. Maybe he was telling me to be strong. Maybe both. After he passed, I threw myself into caretaking. First my garden, then church duties, then neighbors, errands. My grief was a quiet one. I didn't wail or collapse. I folded sheets and baked zucchini bread. I stayed busy, because if I stopped, I'd start listening to the silence in the house, and that was too much. When David, my youngest son, called me to say he and his new wife, Leanne, were having financial troubles and needed a place to stay just for a few months, I didn't hesitate. I offered them the guest room, freshly dusted, with crisp linens and lavender tucked into the pillowcases. I thought, maybe this house needs laughter again. Maybe I do too. Leanne arrived with a rolling suitcase and a sharp eye. She was younger than David by 6 years, fashionable in a cold, curated way, every nail manicured, every opinion decisive. Her teenage daughter from a previous marriage, Ava, was all angles and headphones, rolling her eyes at everything. I tried to make them feel welcome, left chocolates on their pillows, bought almond milk instead of cream. Small things, thoughtful things. At first, it felt like a sleepover that had overstayed itself, but slowly, things shifted. Leanne began referring to the house as our home. The living room furniture was rearranged, then replaced. Family. Photos of John and me were put away for a cleaner aesthetic. She even changed the Wi-Fi name to House of Halbrook, her last name, not mine. David, once my sweet boy who used to bring me lilacs from the backyard, became someone else. Distant, defensive, always saying, "She means well, Mom. You're just not used to change." And I suppose he was right. I wasn't. I used to find purpose in making sure every corner of this home was a reflection of comfort. Ironed napkins, candlelight on cold evenings, a drawer full of charger cords, tissues, and peppermints, just in case. Now everything felt curated by someone else, like I was living inside a magazine spread I hadn't subscribed to, and it wasn't just the decor. I was being edited out of my own life. They hosted dinners, but I wasn't part of the planning. Ava brought friends over who stomped through the halls, slamming doors without apology. Leanne started ordering groceries without asking what I needed. Even my knitting basket was moved to make room for a chic potted fern. Slowly, invisibly, the house was no longer mine. I kept telling myself it was temporary. That they'd find a new apartment soon. That they'd remember I wasn't just a landlord, I was family. But the weeks turned into months. The seasons changed. And with each passing holiday, I felt myself fading. I'd host Thanksgiving, but be asked to just handle desserts. I'd offer advice and be told, "Oh, Marie, that's so sweet, but we've got it." I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just displaced. I started spending more time in my room, not because anyone told me to, but because it was the only place left that still felt like mine. I'd sit at my old writing desk, sorting through old letters. From John, rereading his scribbled notes in the margins of cookbooks, tracing the coffee rings he left behind on the oak surface. And yet, even in the quiet, I still loved this home. The way the sunlight filtered through the front windows in the morning, the creak of the third step on the staircase, the way the back porch light flickered for exactly 3 seconds before fully turning on. These were not flaws. These were memories, and I would have endured all of it, the slow erasure, the backhanded remarks, the suffocating politeness, if not for what happened at that dinner. That moment when Leanne silenced me in front of my entire extended family. That was the pivot. She didn't scream. She didn't insult me outright. No, she leaned in, as if offering help, and with syrup in her voice said, "Let's keep the chatter minimal tonight, Guests want fresh energy." That was the moment I realized I hadn't been invited to dinner. I was being dismissed. From the table, Marie once baked the bread, set the table, and welcomed everyone in. But now she was being told to stay in the corner. So she stood up, silently, and went to find the deed. The thing about erosion is, it happens so slowly you don't realize you're sinking until your feet are wet. After that dinner, I began replaying all the little moments that led us here. Like puzzle pieces I hadn't realized were part of the same picture. When David and Leanne first moved in, it was pitched as a bridge, just a few months until they got back on their feet. David had left his job in advertising after a merger, and Leanne's boutique skincare line was pivoting toward influencer collaborations. That's how she phrased it anyway. I said yes before he even finished asking. My instinct was to help. He's my son. What else could I say? I thought we'd have movie nights again. I thought they'd be grateful. Instead, within weeks, the dynamic shifted. It began subtly. Leanne moved all my pots and pans to different cabinets, saying they were more intuitive this way. Then came the neutral-toned throw pillows, replacing the ones I'd hand-sewn with John. My collection of mismatched vintage mugs was swapped for sleek, handleless ones. "A clean visual line," she said, "feels more calming." It was always framed as help, improvement, modernization. As if my life was outdated wallpaper being peeled off for something shinier. I tried not to take it personally. I really did. But the real change, the one that broke something I didn't even know was fragile, was in David. He started echoing her language. "It's just a phase, Mom. Don't be so sentimental. Try to be open-minded, you know? She's making the house more livable." More livable? I had lived here for 31 years, raised him here, nursed him through chickenpox in the downstairs bathroom, cried in the kitchen after my first chemotherapy scare, even though, thank God, it turned out to be benign. But in their eyes, now I was sentimental clutter. Then came Ava. She's 14, moody, and glued to her phone, as many teens are. I didn't expect gratitude, but I did expect basic manners. One day, she walked in from school, saw me in the kitchen, and said, "Ugh, it smells like old people in here." Leanne laughed. David chuckled awkwardly. I said nothing. Silence had become my armor. They started entertaining more. Friends of Leanne's, loud, successful types who wore chunky sneakers and brought fancy olives in jars I couldn't pronounce. I became a ghost floating through my own home, clearing dishes while people called me the sweet lady who lets them crash here. Nobody introduced me as David's mother, or John's widow, just Marie. Sometimes not even that. Final straw was subtle, as it always is. I'd asked Leanne if we could leave up the Christmas decorations until January 6th. It was a small tradition John and I held on to, 12 nights of Christmas, the old-fashioned way. She smiled and said, "Oh, Marie, traditions are lovely, in theory. But the house is starting to look a little cluttered, don't you think?" Then, without waiting for an answer, she pulled the tree down the very next morning. The next day, I went into the attic to find the wedding album, just to hold it. Just to remind myself this house had a soul before curated lighting and citrus-scented candles, and that's when I saw it, the fireproof box. John and I had stored all our important documents in it, birth certificates, insurance papers, the deed. And when I opened it, I remembered something I'd forgotten in the fog of grief and good intentions. This house was still in my name, only mine. We'd never restructured it after he passed. There had been talks about adding David for simplicity later, but I'd never followed through. Life got busy. The grief got thick. In that moment, holding that brittle paper in my hand, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt awake. I looked around at the attic, the old Christmas ornaments, the boxes of John's books, the little rocking horse David used to ride. They had made me feel like I was lucky to still be here. Like I was some relic being tolerated. But the truth was, they were guests. They were tolerated. By me. They had moved into my world, rewritten the rules, and convinced me I was being unreasonable for remembering how things used to be. That night, I didn't cry. I made a pot of chamomile tea and sat in the sunroom, watching the snow fall in thin white sheets across the porch. I didn't know what I would do yet, but I knew this. I was not invisible. I had not vanished, and maybe, just maybe, they needed a reminder of that. Marie descended from the attic with the deed in one hand and her spine a little straighter. She hadn't raised her voice in months, but maybe it was time to let the paperwork speak for her. It was Leanne's idea to host the extended family dinner. "Our turn," she'd said brightly, as if the house had suddenly changed hands. "I'll plan everything. You just relax and enjoy." I should have been suspicious then. The invitations went out over text, group chats filled with emojis and Pinterest links. I watched it all unfold like a guest watching someone else arrange a party. In their own living room, I wasn't asked for input, not even when it came to the menu. I was told to leave it to the younger generation, and that I'd earned a night off, earned it. As if inclusion were some kind of currency I'd depleted. I tried to stay out of the way. I dusted the baseboards, fluffed the pillows, even ironed the napkins Leanne had tossed aside for disposable ones. But deep down, I knew this wasn't my dinner. On the day of the gathering, I spent the morning walking slowly through the house, remembering who we used to be. John would have been polishing the silver. David would be stealing spoonfuls of pie filling. I stood in the hallway, touching the wooden doorframe where we had marked the boys' heights every birthday. Ava had painted over it 2 months ago. By 6 p.m., the house was filled with people. Siblings, cousins, in-laws, some I hadn't seen since John's funeral. They complimented the house, unaware the woman who built it was serving wine from the sidelines. I smiled, nodded, asked about grandkids and knee replacements, all while Leanne flitted about like a host on television, accepting praise like a prize. "She has such an eye," someone whispered near the kitchen. "She really brought the place to life," another said. I bit my lip so hard I tasted copper. The dinner itself was an orchestrated performance. White plates, name cards, music softly humming from the speakers. Leanne gave a speech about family as chosen energy, and David stood beside her, one hand on her back, smiling as if he'd been cast in a role. When someone asked about the Origin of the recipe for the roast chicken, Leanne said. Oh, something I threw together last minute. Old flavors, modern flair. It was my recipe. From my mother. Handwritten on a card that used to sit in my kitchen drawer before it was decluttered. And still, I said nothing. I smiled. I sipped my lukewarm Pinot. I breathed. Until dessert. Had brought out my homemade lemon pound cake, a family favorite, and set it gently on the table next to Leanne's artisanal tarts. I wasn't trying to compete, just to contribute. A quiet gesture. Leanne glanced at it and said, "Oh, that's so sweet, Marie." A little vintage touch. Then with a laugh, "Just keep the chatter minimal tonight, Guests want fresh energy." A few chuckles. Not loud, but enough. Enough to cut. And then David, my son. My sweet boy, once so protective, so gentle, he didn't even look up. He just passed the water pitcher as if nothing had happened. That was when something inside me unclenched. I looked at each face at that table, people who had once called me for soup recipes, babysitting, advice on divorce. Now they averted their eyes like I was some unwanted echo, but they didn't know. They didn't know that earlier that week, while Leanne was at her wellness branding meeting and David was out job hunting, I'd invited a real estate agent to walk through the house. They didn't know I'd already spoken with a lawyer about the logistics of sale and relocation. They didn't know that when I'd gone quiet, it wasn't surrender. It was strategy. They didn't know that just beneath their feet, the floorboards were shifting. After dinner, I cleared the plates like always. But this time, my hands didn't shake. My back didn't stoop. Later, as Leanne took selfies with her guests and Ava live-streamed some nonsense from the porch, I sat in my room and opened the listing draft the realtor had sent me. It read, "Charming, character-filled colonial on a wooded lot. 4 bedrooms, hardwood floors, 2.2 M valuation, one owner, me." I stared at those words for a long time. This wasn't just a house. It was a monument to every version of myself I'd ever been. Teacher, wife, mother, caretaker, host. And if they weren't going to honor it, I'd make damn sure someone else did. I clicked Request Market Activation. A simple button, but what a beautiful sound it made. Marie had been asked to dim herself so others could shine, but instead she lit the fuse. And this time, the fire was hers to hold. The next morning, the house was still sticky with the smell of last night's roast and resentment. I moved through the kitchen early, barefoot, careful not to wake anyone. The dining table still had a wine ring near where Leanne had set her glass. I wiped it slowly, deliberately, as if erasing her words. "Let's keep the chatter minimal tonight, I'd been repeating it in my head like a scratched record. Every syllable clanged against my ribs. Not because of what she said, but because no one, not even my son, had thought to stop her. I carried my tea to the sunroom, the same place where I'd sat with John every Sunday morning for 27 years. He'd sip black coffee and read the paper while I wrote in my journal. We used to laugh about the neighbors' squabbles, imagine traveling to Italy one day. We never did. Life got too full, and then suddenly too short. I closed my eyes and let myself remember. Flashback. John had just finished installing the banister upstairs, a week before David was born. He came downstairs covered in sawdust, grinning like a fool, holding up a splintered piece of wood. "Don't touch the railing yet," he said. "It's got character." "Is it safe?" I asked. "Nope, but it's ours." We laughed. That laugh. The one that told me no matter how small our world was, it was built on something solid. Later that night, I'd caught him standing at the foot of the crib, whispering promises to a son who hadn't even arrived. "I'll teach you to build things, buddy," starting with a home. I had built everything around that promise. My life had been woven into this place, floor by floor, memory by memory, back to present, and now. The people living here rolled their eyes when I reminded Ava not to leave food wrappers in the couch cushions. They called my careful routines quirks. Leanne made a point of referring to John as your first husband once. There had been no second. They were rewriting my story in real time, and I had let them. Why? Because I believed love required silence, that good women endure. That family meant self-sacrifice. But maybe I had confused love with loyalty to pain. I picked up a framed photo on the side table, John in his garden, holding up a tomato like he'd just discovered gold. He used to say, "If you're ever cornered, don't bark, just move the fence, move the fence." I walked to the closet, pulled down the lockbox again, and spread its contents on the bed. Deed, insurance policies, appraisal letters. I read every line, slowly. My name, always alone, no co-owner, no inheritance clause, no shared equity. This house wasn't just in my name, it was under my authority, and for the first time in months I realized I didn't need to ask permission. I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't need David's blessing, or Leanne's understanding. I needed my own courage. Still, courage comes in flickers, not floods, and grief. It sneaks in when you least expect it. That night, I sat with a framed letter John had written to me on our 30th anniversary. I'd found it tucked inside an old gardening book. The ink had faded, but I knew the words by heart. You made this house a home, Marie, not the walls, not the beams, you. If you ever forget that, come sit here and feel the floor under your feet. We built this together. I pressed the letter to my chest and wept, not for what they'd done to me, but for what I'd allowed. I had been waiting to be seen, to be thanked, to be respected. But you cannot wait your way into dignity. You take it back. I stood up, walked to the mirror, and looked at myself the way I imagined John would if he were still here, not with pity, but with pride. My eyes were tired, yes, but steady. My hands had softened, but they were still capable, and my heart, while bruised, still beat with purpose. The next morning, I made calls, to the realtor, to the lawyer, to a moving service that specialized in estate transitions, which felt poetic somehow. I began removing valuables from closets. I started sorting what would go with me and what would be donated, not rushed, not in anger, but with quiet precision. I even returned to the attic one last time, where I found the wooden height chart John had carved into the doorframe. I traced the marks: David, age 4, David, age 9. A moment caught in pencil, now buried under Leanne's, coat of gray paint, but I still remembered where the lines were. I took a photo. I took the door off its hinges, let them wonder why. Have you ever had to reclaim your space from someone who didn't value it? I'd love to hear your story. Your voice matters more than you know. Marie folded John's letter back into its envelope, kissed it once, and placed it inside her purse, right next to the house deed and a list of prospective buyers. This time, she wasn't waiting for permission. She was packing for freedom. Peace returned in small, controlled breaths. There was something strangely soothing about the logistics of a clean escape. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I became deliberate, precise. Every drawer I opened, every paper I filed, every keepsake I wrapped in bubble wrap felt like a declaration: this is still mine, and I get to decide what comes with me. I called the moving company under the pretense of decluttering, which Leanne praised loudly. "Oh, that's such a good idea," she said while thumbing through her phone. "Minimalism is so healing." She didn't ask what I was removing. She didn't notice that my grandmother's china disappeared from the glass hutch, or that the quilt John's mother had sewn was no longer on the back of the couch. She never even realized the antique clock in the hall, our wedding gift from my parents, had gone missing. I had already wrapped it carefully and placed it in the growing storage unit I'd quietly rented 2 towns over. The real estate agent, Madeline, was a gentle soul in her 40s with a lilting voice and soft hands that reminded me of my former students. She called me Mrs. Halbrook, even after I told her she could use Marie. We met twice a week while Leanne was at her Pilates classes and David was out pretending to job hunt. I gave her the full tour, room by room, sharing stories I never thought I'd tell again. "This sunroom," I said, running my hand along the windowsill. "This is where my husband and I said goodbye." She paused just for a beat, then nodded. "We'll make sure it goes to someone who understands what this place means." I believed her. We staged private showings on weekday mornings. I pretended to run errands. Ava never noticed the extra. Shoes by the front door or the faint smell of fresh cookies used to entice potential buyers. Leanne wouldn't have recognized the difference between a real guest and a prospective buyer if they offered her double for the kitchen island. Within a week, we had 4 interested parties. 2 offered full asking price. 1 offered above. I accepted the above. $3 million in cash, close in 30 days, but I didn't tell anyone, not yet. Let them sip their smoothies and mock my old lady music while I packed up their future in no plain sight. And in the meantime, I leaned into the part I'd always known best: hospitality. I cooked more. I smiled more. I asked Leanne if she needed help with her next dinner party. She responded with a slow blink of surprise and said, "That would be lovely. Thank you for being so adaptable." Adaptable, as if I were a couch cushion that could be refluffed and repositioned. I even bought Ava a new pair of earbuds after she complained about hers. She took them without a thank you, but I didn't flinch. I didn't need gratitude anymore. I had the deed. I had the buyer. I had a plan. One afternoon, as I folded fresh laundry, David walked by and said, "Hey, Mom, you've been really great lately. I know it wasn't easy adjusting to everything." Adjusting? It felt like someone handing you a medal after setting your house on fire. But I smiled. "Thank you, sweetheart. I just want everyone to be happy." And I did. I just no longer assumed that included me staying silent. That night, I sat at my writing desk and drafted a letter, not to them, but to myself. A goodbye, a thank you, a boundary. I wrote about what the house had meant to me, about the laughter in the walls, about the silences too. I wrote about John's hands, about the way he used to whistle through his teeth when he planted petunias. I wrote about the first time David said "Mama" in the living room. And I wrote about the last time he said "I love you" like he meant it. Then I signed it, folded it, and tucked it into a white envelope. I placed it in the drawer beneath the salt spoons, just in case I ever needed reminding. With everything quietly in motion, I planned one final dinner. Just the 4 of us. My idea. I thought it would be nice to celebrate, I said. Leanne raised a curious brow. Celebrate what? I smiled, wide and practiced. A fresh start. I made my lemon pound cake, the real one. The one with the zest and the glaze and the heart in it. I used John's old cast-iron skillet for the roast, poured wine I'd been saving for years. I even lit the old candelabras. David toasted to renewed energy and family harmony. For rolled her eyes and left early to FaceTime a friend. But me, I sat at the head of the table, the place they'd tried to take from me. I sipped my wine and looked around at the walls one last time. They were no longer filled with memories. They were full of exits. Marie washed the last dish, dried her hands, and smiled. The offer was finalized, the buyers were waiting, and the family. They were celebrating a new beginning, never realizing it wasn't theirs. The unraveling began not with an explosion, but with an envelope. I left it on the kitchen counter, right beside Leanne's neatly labeled meal prep containers. The flap wasn't sealed. I wanted her to open it. Curiosity is predictable after all. Inside, a full-color copy of the real estate contract, my signature, the buyers, the sale price, the closing date. March 12th. 3 weeks away. That morning, I sat on the porch with my tea, watching cardinals. Flit between branches, it was calm, crisp, I heard the envelope rustle before I heard the shriek. "Marie?" Leanne's voice cracked like porcelain. I turned slowly, letting her see me, serene, composed, unreadable. "What is this?" She barked, waving the papers like a surrender flag on fire. "That," I said, sipping, "is the sound of boundaries being respected." David appeared a moment later, hair unkempt, eyes half awake. "What's going on?" Leanne spun to him, nearly spitting. "She sold the house! She's selling it! Our house! She sold our house!" David's eyes flicked to mine, and for a second, just a breath, I saw the child he used to be. The one who clung to my hand in parking lots. The one who whispered secrets into my ear at bedtime. Then it was gone, replaced by a man grasping for control. "Is this true?" I nodded. "It closes in 3 weeks. You'll need to find new arrangements." He stepped forward, voice rising. "You didn't even talk to us about this. You didn't ask." "I didn't have to." I said it quietly, calmly, but it landed like thunder. "This is our home," Leanne snapped. "We made it better. We gave it life again." "No," I said. "You repainted it, rearranged it, claimed it, but it was never yours to begin with." Silence. Even. Ava, now standing in the hallway with her arms crossed and earbuds dangling, said nothing. David slumped into a chair. "Mom, please. We were getting on our feet. We just needed more time." "You had 14 months, I replied. "And in that time, you erased me. You told me I was lucky to be included in my own home," Leanne scoffed. "This is just revenge. You're being spiteful." I shook my head. "No, spite is loud. This is clarity." They didn't understand. Of course they didn't. They'd grown used to the muted version of me, the Marie who folded napkins and swallowed insults. The Marie who stepped aside. But that version of me had quietly moved into storage. "You've humiliated us," Leanne hissed. "What are we supposed to do now?" I stood, walked to the hall, returned with a manila folder and placed it on the table. Inside are listings I pulled for local rentals. Month-to-month options. Within your budget, I highlighted the pet-friendly ones. She looked at me like I'd served her poison. "I'm not cruel," I added. "I'm just done being invisible." David finally spoke, softer now. "So that's it? You're just done with us?" I paused, looked at him fully. "I'm not done with you, David. But I'm done being stepped over to reach your wife's ambition." He looked away, and that was when Ava, who hadn't said a word all morning, mumbled, "You could have just told us you hated us." I turned to her, and for the first time, I felt nothing but compassion. Because she was just a girl being shaped by a world of performance and pride. "I don't hate anyone, Ava, but I love myself too much to keep shrinking for you." She blinked. Something flickered in her eyes, confusion maybe, or understanding. They all dispersed eventually. David called his brother in Boston, probably looking for backup. Leanne stormed upstairs and slammed doors. Ava went back to her phone, though noticeably, she stayed on the porch longer than usual. And me? I finished my tea, cleaned the cup, then pulled out the suitcase I had quietly stored in the back of my closet. In the following days, the tension turned from rage to bargaining. David left notes on my door, offers to pay rent, suggestions to co-own the property. He even brought me my favorite coffee one morning, just like he used to when he was little. "I get it now," he said. "You felt pushed out. I'm sorry." It was the first real apology I'd heard in over a year. I touched his hand briefly. "I appreciate that. I do. But apologies don't change structure. And this house was always meant to hold love, not power." He looked gutted. But he didn't argue. Leanne, on the other hand, tried a different approach. One evening, she came down in full makeup, holding a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "I was hard on you," she began. "We got off on the wrong foot, but I think we can still fix this. Together." She poured us both a glass. sat across from me, smiled like a woman negotiating a brand deal. "I could put your name on my skincare line," she offered. "We rebrand it, legacy-inspired. Marie's Botanicals." "We could say the house inspired it." I stared at her. Not angry, just amazed. "You think I stayed quiet because I lacked imagination," I said. "But silence was a choice, and now I'm choosing something else." I left the glass untouched. Marie walked upstairs, leaving the untouched wine glass glistening in the kitchen light, while beneath it sat a second envelope, this one addressed to the buyers. Final confirmation enclosed. The final week passed with a strange sort of civility, like actors who'd forgotten their lines but refused to leave the stage. Leanne no longer slammed doors. She left the house often, claiming client calls and brand meetings, but I knew she was visiting rental properties. David stayed quiet, moving like a man underwater. He wanted to fight, I think. But the war was already over. There were no battles left, just cleanup. Ava was the only one who seemed unchanged. She still watched TikToks on full volume, left half-eaten, toast on the counter, and never said goodnight. But I noticed something new in her. Hesitation. A kind of caution, as though she was watching me now instead of pretending I didn't exist. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't gloat. I packed. Room by room, item by item, I sorted a lifetime into 3 categories: keep, donate, release. Found our old wedding china wrapped in newspaper from 1982. I found a music box that still played the lullaby I used to sing to David. I even found a letter from my mother in the bottom of a drawer, her handwriting still firm and practical. Don't ever let anyone decide your worth by how quiet you are. The day before closing, I spent one last morning in the garden. The air was cool, the soil damp from an early frost. I trimmed the lavender bushes John had planted, ran my fingers over the cracked stepping stones he had laid by hand. I clipped a single rose from the back trellis and tucked it into a jar to bring with me. It had no scent left, but the stem still stood proud. Just before sunset, I laid a small box on David's bed. Inside it, baby photos, one of John's flannel shirts, and a folded note in my handwriting. "You will always be my son, but I can't be your silence anymore. This house raised you. It's time for you to remember how." I left no note for Leanne. Instead, I placed a single item on the kitchen counter before I left: a brass key. The one John had cut for me the day we first moved in. It no longer opened the front door. I had already returned that one to the realtor. That evening, I stood in the entryway and took one final look around. The walls were bare, the floors echoed. Even the air felt different, like the house was exhaling with me. I touched the banister John had once built, the one that had been too rough for Leanne's taste. I ran my hand down it slowly, like a curtain call. Then I walked out the front door and closed it behind me. The new cottage was small, bright, and perfect, perched near a quiet lake 2 towns over, with tall pines at the edge of the property and a creaky swing on the porch. The kind of place where you could forget to wear a watch and not notice until nightfall. I arrived with only the essentials: a few books, a box of china, John's letters, my quilt, and the wind chimes. Those wind chimes. John had bought them at a roadside antique shop, claiming they sounded like laughter in the wind. I had rolled my eyes, but he hung them outside our bedroom window anyway. Now they hung outside my new bedroom, and when the breeze picked up, they rang, not with nostalgia, but with relief. I slept better that night than I had in years. The next morning, I made tea, opened all the windows, sat on the porch in silence. That's when I saw it, a robin landing on the railing, staring at me like it knew something. I took it as a blessing. In the days that followed, I settled in. I joined a watercolor class at the community center. I went to a book club. I even reconnected with Judith Klein, A friend I hadn't spoken to since high school, now widowed like me, and full of sharp, hilarious opinions about dating apps. I was no longer shrinking. I was growing in new directions. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail, handwritten, from David. Mom, you were right. I stopped seeing you. I let her change what this house meant, and I let you disappear into the background of your own life. I'm sorry. I don't know what comes next, but I hope you'll let me figure it out beside you someday. I cried when I read it. Not because I needed the apology, but because he needed to say it. I didn't write back. Not yet. Forgiveness isn't always a reply. Sometimes it's the freedom to move forward in peace. Marie set the letter down, picked up her paintbrush, and turned back to her canvas, a lake scene in soft blues and greens. She was no longer erasing herself to keep the peace. She was painting a world that finally had space for her in it. The house sold for the full offer, $2.3 million, cash, closed in 29 days. The new owners, a young couple from Boston, were expecting twins and looking for a home with roots. I met them once, just briefly. The wife was pregnant and glowing. The husband carried a stack of blueprints with excited hands. I liked them immediately. On closing day, I left a note taped to the inside of the kitchen cabinet, the one above, the spice rack where John used to hide little love notes. This house was built by love, not by money, not by design, but by memories. If you listen carefully, you'll still hear laughter in the sunroom and lullabies in the hallway. Take care of her. And then I walked away without looking back. In the cottage by the lake, my days settled into gentle rhythm. Morning tea, painting classes, evening walks. I had a rocking chair on the porch, an old dog named Charlie from the local rescue shelter, and a sense of peace I hadn't known since before John fell ill. I didn't expect to feel so light, like my soul had been wearing a weighted coat for years, and I'd finally slipped out of it. Sometimes I'd think of the old house, especially the porch swing where John and I used to talk about growing old. But now, those thoughts didn't ache, they warmed. I began to host again, in a small way. Judith came over with lemon bars and gossip. The book club met once a month, and I found myself laughing, not politely, not for show, but full belly laughter that made me feel 15 years younger. And then, one day, the phone rang. David. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it later with a trembling heart. Hey, Mom, just checking in. We moved into a condo last week. Ava actually likes it. It's near her new school. Leanne. She's quiet these days. I think we're all adjusting. I know I said it in the letter, but I want to say it again. I'm sorry. I forgot who raised me, and I forgot what it means to protect what matters. I hope you're okay. I hope you're happy. I love you. He paused. Call me if you ever feel like it. Or don't. I get it. I cried again, quietly, not out of pain, but from something closer to relief. I didn't call him back that day, or the next, but I did write a note. Not long, just enough. Thank you. I am okay. I am happy. I love you too. I mailed it. No return address. No pressure. Some bridges need time to settle before they can carry weight again. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my watercolor class when Ava showed up. I nearly didn't recognize her at first. Hair dyed a softer shade, a new canvas tote, slung over her shoulder. She shuffled awkwardly through the door and sat down across from me without saying anything. I'm not here to apologize, she said flatly. I just wanted to see what you were doing. I nodded. Fair enough. She watched me paint in silence, then asked, How do you know where to start? I looked down at my brush. You don't. You just begin. And trust that if you mess up, there's always another layer. She didn't say anything else, but she stayed for an hour, then came back the next week. She never called me Grandma, but one day she asked if I had any tea. That was enough. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed silent, if I had continued making room for everyone but myself, if I'd let my identity be chipped away by politeness and guilt. Would they have ever noticed I was disappearing? Would? I have. But here, in this cottage, where the wind plays the chimes and the lake ripples without end, I have reclaimed every inch of my voice, not the loud kind, not the vengeful kind, the kind that says, I'm here, and I'm not sorry. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-worth? What did you choose, and what would you do differently now? I'd love to hear your story. Marie set the last brushstroke onto her canvas, a simple lakeside scene, full of sky and silence, and realized the house she had truly needed all along wasn't built with walls. It was built with boundaries, and she'd finally moved in. Some houses are made of wood and nails, others of habits and history, but the strongest ones, the ones that save you, are built of choice. It took me 62 years to realize that. For most of my life, I equated love with endurance. I thought being a good wife meant swallowing disappointment with a smile. I thought being a good mother meant saying yes, even when everything in me was screaming no. I thought being quiet was noble, that staying out of the way was dignified, but silence, left too long, rots from the inside. It's strange how quickly people will adjust to you vanishing. They won't say it aloud, but they'll rearrange the furniture, move your memories, call your boundaries attitude. They'll ask you to be flexible when what they really want is for you to disappear politely. And I did for a while, until I realized I wasn't just being quiet, I was being erased. Selling. The house wasn't revenge. It wasn't cruelty. It was reclamation. It was me standing on ground I had already built, reminding everyone, including myself, whose hands shaped it. And when I walked away, I didn't leave empty. I left full of the woman I used to be, full of the woman I still was, and maybe, most importantly, full of the woman I was still becoming. I often sit on the porch of my new cottage and think about legacy. Not the kind they write in obituaries or carve into headstones, the kind that lingers quietly in the lives of others. John left me laughter and lavender. David, even now, gives me quiet hope. Ava, strangely, reminds me of myself before I knew who I really was, and me. I leave behind this story. For anyone who's ever been made to feel small in their own home. For any woman who has been told to let it go, keep the peace, or stop being so emotional. For the souls who give everything and are left holding nothing, you are allowed to reclaim your name. You are allowed to say, enough. You are allowed to love people without letting them walk through you like a hallway. I've stopped waiting for permission to enjoy my life. I paint now, not to impress, but to release. I sing in the church choir again, badly but loudly. I learned how to bake gluten-free cookies just to surprise the woman next door who thought I'd be too set in my ways. I'm not. I'm set in my worth. And every time I hear the wind move through John's chimes on the porch, I smile. He was right. You don't have to bark when you're cornered. Just move the fence. I don't know what's next. I might take a train across the country. I might finally write that book I talked about for years. I might spend the rest of my days on this porch, painting skies and sipping tea. All I know is, whatever comes next, I'll meet it standing tall. Because I found my voice, and I'm never folding it away in a linen drawer again. To everyone listening, I leave you with this. Your space matters. Your presence matters. Your silence is not owed. It's a gift. And when someone misuses it, take it back, not with rage, not with violence, but with certainty, because sometimes the strongest way to speak is to act. And if they ever tell you to stay quiet, smile gently, stand tall, and start packing, not your bags, your power. Marie hung the wind chimes beside her door, stepped back, and smiled. The breeze picked up, and for the first time in years, the air didn't just pass. Through her, it listened.